Woo! So our next speaker here for you today is a security analyst and former wizard eaten by a rat, but it looks like he got better. So Schottman is a application security-focused security professional with experience ranging from web application development to purple team engagements. He has spoken at regional and national conferences on threat hunting, web shells, purple teams, and more. So he's going to be talking to us about realigning from chaotic evil. And as a speaker for BSidesRDU, we just want to show our appreciation with a sneaky book to you.
Fine literature.
Yes.
Right. Write better, speak better.
That's not a message in any way.
Good afternoon. Is the volume good? All the way in the back? Great. So about me, I got the introduction already. You may have noticed from the title, I am not just a security person, I am a geek. I've done pretty much a little bit of everything in IT at some point. I started in web app development and system administration, did DevOps, and then I've done just about everything in security at some point or other. So it's given me a variety of perspectives on the different incentives that we have in this industry. You can add me on Twitter. I don't really post much, just kind of sarcastic comments on other people's posts. You're welcome to add me on LinkedIn. I'll add just about anyone. The obligatory disclaimer, I am not speaking on behalf of BB&T, Truist, or any other entity. All opinions expressed are my own. I'm a stickler about using images with permission, so everything's cleared. And an additional disclaimer, I am not just talking about my employers, past and present, so please don't take the takeaway that I should never work with Joe because he works terrible places. A lot of this is gathered from stories I've gotten from friends working at most of the big companies in this area and industries out in Silicon Valley, that sort of place. And the last disclaimer, I'm not actually a D&D guru, and if you are, at some point, you're probably going to start reaching your hand up and saying, you're using that term wrong. It's just a simile. It's just sort of a metaphor, so bear with me and don't correct me. I played a Brand X ripoff of D&D in my misguided youth, so I use the terms a little bit differently. So why am I giving this talk? There's a big threat that I've seen a lot of industry research on that I wanted to update you about, and that is works. You see here in the Gandalf Magic Quadrant that there's a number of things. There's COBOL and Windows XP still hanging out as the undead. Kubernetes is coming up, but really on the upper right-hand corner, the leaders, big teeth and sharp pointy things, we've got orcs. So really, why did I choose this as a talk at a security conference? So I started with the very typical thought of, we need to realign the synergies of how we incentivize things in security, blah, blah, blah. And if I submitted this talk, how many people would have actually shown up? But if you want something a little bit more infosec as a title, you can think of this as social engineering your way to security success. A lot of people have the technical parts of security nailed. They can do the defensive stuff really well. They can do the offensive stuff really well. But if you don't know how to communicate with the other sides, your counterparts, whether you're working as a contractor or whether you're working as someone who's on part of the main company, you need to engage with the other sides effectively. And I've seen a lot of people making mistakes on how they do that because people assume that what motivates them motivates everyone, and that's not always true. And the big problem is the corporations, companies, organizations, what have you, they often don't align the incentives that are given people. That's the things that affect their raises, their bonuses, whether they get praise internally, that sort of thing or not. They don't actually align that for security. So these are some ideas on how to fix that. So I've got a dear friend who worked with a guy that he got very, very upset about because this guy would pick out the projects that management rewarded people for working on. He would only work on those projects. Anything that he knew that management didn't really care about, he did zero work on. And this made my friend very upset, and he thought that this guy was a jerk. And obviously, doing that to an extreme, probably kind of problematic. But if management doesn't actually recognize what needs to be done and reward the people that do the necessary work, that's a management problem. So very often, people do what you incentivize them to do. So this may be counter to security, this may be counter to stability, this may be counter to everything good that you want as a corporation or organization. But if that's what's going to get them the $10,000 bonus, the $20,000 bonus, what have you, they're going to do that. And there's other factors too. People have pet projects that they will pursue certain things doggedly because they love a certain platform or a certain application. So it's not always about incentives, but within the corporate structure, it very often is. So if you're not familiar with D&D or AD&D, which is advanced, D&D is Dungeons & Dragons, AD&D is Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It's a fantasy game where it's a collaborative form of fiction, basically, that's mediated by dice. And so people come together and tell a story, and when you need to figure out what happens, you roll some dice and figure things out. It was inspired by the Tolkien's Lord of the Rings mythos, which, as we know, has a guy that gets corrupted by the one ring zero. So this popped up the other day, and it's a little introduction to what alignment is. I thought it was a fun little thing. Oh, also as a side on D&D, had a rebirth right now because it's been featured prominently in the Netflix show Stranger Things, which I'm not actually familiar with, but a bunch of people came up the previous time I get this talk. It's like, yeah, my kids love Stranger Things, so we've been playing D&D with them. So it's kind of neat seeing that's come back from the 80s. So what is alignment within the system? So good, it implies that you're altruistic, you value life, you're trying to do things right within a fairly typical human ethos. That's the defensive people within your companies, the blue team, the people monitoring the SOC, people, hopefully your developers all have the best interests of the company at heart. Evil is all about doing what you're not supposed to be doing. This could be a malicious insider, it could be an insider who just doesn't care, they're burnt out, they're stressed out, and they're doing the bare minimum to get by without, actually doing what it takes to keep the company safe. Or it could be the outright evil. This could be foreign companies, foreign countries trying to get into your company's defenses, that sort of thing. Then also, within the good and evil, you've got lawful and chaotic. So you can be lawful evil. So this might be someone working for the Russian government who they obey the Russian laws, they obey the rules that they're supposed to do. They clock in the morning and they do that sort of thing, but they're evil because they're coming against you, against your best interests. You can also have pure chaos. There's, it's all about the lulls, it's about the fun. A chaotic evil person might just be doing things to destroy things, wiping out files, getting lots of money. A good chaotic person, again, this might be someone who's they're working for your company, they're a little burned out, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and they're a force that kind of spins around, especially within state governments where people often can't be gotten rid of. I've seen people kind of bounce around and disrupt whatever department they happen to end up in for a while, and they get pushed out the next one, and they're just a force of chaos within the company or departments. So when you're putting together a group of D&D players, you want to have kind of similar players with kind of similar motivations. So borrowing from the Creative Commons, I found someone did some fun illustrations using Lego characters. If you have a good character who is a priest who supports the forces of light within the game and obeys all the laws, and throw in a necromancer, you're not going to be able to tell a good story together because the players are going to be fighting against each other rather than working with each other to make this collaborative story. So this is what you should try to avoid when you're putting together people's motivations. So as a brief aside, when I say red, there's this technical term in the industry for red team that I like, which is when you're actually simulating an advanced attacker. This is commonly misused. A lot of people use red team as general pen testing. In the context of this, red just means offensive security, so it could be anything from running vulnerability scans all the way through doing actual red team exercises. The red team, or offensive security, is simulating evil. You're doing things that shouldn't be done to the applications, to the systems. But generally, you're doing it as someone who's been authorized to do so. It's the fun part of the industry. Generally, when someone says, when I talk to someone, say, I do security, oh, you hack things? Yeah, because no one says, oh, you work in a SOC. That's the really fun part of the job. And so I think that one of the problems we have as an industry is we give too much respect to the offensive security and not enough respect to the defensive security. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So from the defensive side, because I've been on the defensive side, when you're getting the security report from the pen testers, it can feel kind of like this. You know that there's something bad lurking out there, and you're going to get smacked down, and your management's going to come down hard on you. And it doesn't matter how hard you work. In a large enough organization, there's going to be some risks that are going to get exposed by a test. So some common things I've seen to incentivize the offensive side. It could be objective-based. It could be get shell, get root access on the system, get domain admin. It could be generate a really scary report. Say, I got 3 million credit card records that I could have published. Or it could just do so many tests this year, this quarter, what have you. As I said, the defensive side is more of the good side of things. This is the commonly referred to as the blue team. It could be SOC, which is Security Operations Center, and analyst. It could be people doing threat intel, people that do your forensics, malware analysis, that sort of thing. The blue team is often restrained in what they can do. They're often dealing with long shifts. I know a lot of companies that use 312s, and that can be pretty grueling to deal with. There's often a lot of training. SOC work is a really good first place in the industry, but you kind of get thrown in with a little bit of security background maybe, and you're just kind of being bombarded with the alerts and messages from systems you don't really understand, but you know that you're supposed to respond to 20 of these a day. It can be hard to advance sometimes. There's not always a good pathway forward once you get started on the blue team path. And there's not necessarily a playground set up that you can start learning some of the hands-on offensive security parts. And depending on your organization, the analyst side may also have a lack of funding. And some of the really good tools like SIMs, the search engines that go through terabytes of data, can be really expensive to license. So management may not be willing to provide that for the blue team, so that can be a frustration. So they're often differently aligned. In a large corporation, the blue team and red team often has a complete different management structure. So they, not just their team, but the people they report to and the people they report to may have completely different things that they're incentivized to do by the company. Some common metrics I've seen with blue teams, it could be the number of tickets closed. This can create a perverse incentive where if it's actually a percentage of tickets closed, if you open fewer tickets, you can have a much higher hit rate. It could be the reaction time to alerts, or the really big one, especially for the high-level executives, is not appearing in the news as having been hacked. That's a really important metric for many blue teams. And if you fail at that one, that may be a career-limiting move. So if you have these different incentives coming together, the blue team, this is where I got the title of this from, may see the red team as a force of chaotic evil. And I'll expand it in just a second, but I'm also going to throw in people like operations and programmers here. Security only creates problems for them. So every time a security guy comes and says, you need to do this extra thing, it's taking away from some other responsibility that they have. That's probably what their bonus depends on. So you need to balance what you do working with them. So if you come in just smashing things, causing problems, and being completely unsympathetic to them, you do look like chaotic evil, because at that point, there's not much difference between you and an external attacker as far as affecting what they're getting paid to do. The red team often sees the blue team as being too tied down. The blue team tends to be a lot less flexible. There's the good side and bad side of things, that the blue team often has a playbook that is a strict set of things that you're supposed to do and execute that playbook when something happens. But very often they're supposed to do exactly that sort of thing, and the red team will say, that's a problem because they're not flexible enough. So a few of the other incentives I see in corporations, developers, very often they're incentivized by adding new features rather than stability or security. At a previous company I worked at, we had a big stability problem for quite a while, where the developers would do a software release and stuff would crash and crash and crash, and people would be paged all night. So in that case, we actually did realign the incentives because we put the developers on the pager duty also. And strangely enough, when they started being woken up at 3 o'clock and 3:20 and 3:40, the code stability got a whole lot better. So that wasn't security related in this case, but it was just general stability. But it was a case where the management did step in and say, we have a problem, what can we do to realign those incentives and make it actionable difference? And it did. Operations, so if you're not familiar with D&D, this is a basilisk who has turned the horse there into stone. They're often incentivized by uptime or speed to deployment rather than security. So operations generally doesn't like change. If something's working, they want to keep it that way. They don't necessarily want you doing security testing on it. If you do find security testing, they may say, well, that doesn't actually need to be fixed. Because if their bonus is based on how many 9's percentage uptime they have, if you make them take something down and spend an entire weekend doing reboots to get things fixed, that affects that. And management, they're often incentivized to just not hear from security at all. Other than consulting companies, security doesn't bring in money. Management usually cares about bringing in money. So, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, good managers do pay attention to security because they know that there's an impact if there's a breach, if they get owned, if they hit the news. But very often, if they think things are fine, they may stick their fingers in their ears and try not to hear from security very often. So I mentioned the 9's up a second ago. If you're not familiar in the system in world, there's the 9's of uptime. So 2 9's would be 99% uptime, 3 9's is 99.9% uptime, and 5 9's is 99.999% uptime, and that's something that's very often sought after. These are photos, a photo of my actual dice from my misspent youth. That is a rare 30-sider, which was hard to get back in the day before the internet, and I traded pretty dearly to get that. So one of the companies I worked at decided that they should have 5 9's uptime for the storage facility, for the storage. And that's what the people were incentivized to do. So they bought some very expensive storage that had 5 9's uptime. It was down for something like 15 minutes a year, if that. But because it was so expensive, we ran out of space constantly. So about once a week, no one in the company could get work done for a while until we went through and figured out some files to delete. But that wasn't what the system admins were incentivized to care about, because that one metric is what they were told to care about by management. So this is another example in the other way of where an incentive went poorly for the company. So a lot of the big picture here is beyond our ability to change as a practitioner. You know, management, especially senior management, can start to do some of this, but part of what I'm here to talk about is to tell people to tell their managers to change this sort of thing, but also to think about the different incentives that come together. If you can weave a narrative based on what incentivizes different people, and this could be about fixing things, this could be about getting funding, getting training, that sort of thing. If you know what they care about and you can tell the story that makes them care about why you get this thing that you're going after, that will give you a better success rate. But some things that we can actually do, I'm going to get a little bit more hands-on some practices that I have put into place. So a lot of D&D adventures start in the tavern. You know, it's a good place to throw random characters together and gives them an excuse to start talking, and then someone comes up and gives you a quest. I get a lot of value out of doing lunches with people. I do lunches with people on the same team I work on, with people on different teams within security, in completely different groups, like going out and talking to accountants. They have completely different views about how things work at the company, and sometimes you get really good intelligence out of that. And also going out and talking with vendors, staying topical, and vendors will often buy you lunch as part of this, so you know, you can take advantage of that a little bit. And it also helps build camaraderie. If people like working with you, if they think of you as a human, if they know that you've got 4 kids or you do mountain biking, whatever it is, you're not just some security person coming in and breaking stuff. You're someone that they want to help. That's just human nature, and that goes back to the social engineering part. The more likable and approachable you can be, the better results you're going to get as a security practitioner. And you can use this to recruit new members for your party. So I know someone who started doing lockpicking classes as a little fun extra within his company. And the people got really fired up about that, turned into really good sources of intelligence about what was going on inside the company. So he dealt with, among other things, physical security. And there was an admin assistant who got really into picking locks. And she started saying, oh, you can get around the security gates here and here and here, stuff that he didn't have the time to do, going out and checking every single door. But by recruiting her as someone to help him, even though that wasn't how it was sold to her, or even his initial intent, he got a lot of value out of that. So there's also this concept of security champions. This is especially big within development. So D&D has you have a class, so you might be a fighter, a wizard, magic user. Generally, most people start with one thing, but as you get more experience with your character, you can start doing two things at once. So you can start recruiting people to be your security champions within development or even operations, where you give them training, you give them additional incentives based on keeping things secure, and they spread knowledge within the application development teams. It's not practical to get everyone doing the development at a master's level of security, but if you have that person saying, okay, here's a great baseline, here's how it will help you, because bugs get progressively more expensive to fix the longer they go on. If you have a tool built into your IDE or into your brain that catches the security bug as you type it, that's almost free to fix. If it gets into your CI pipeline and you have to go back, it's fairly cheap. If it gets to the actual build and then it's starting to be deployed onto test systems and it has to go back, be fixed, and then you have to redo your user acceptance testing or your integration testing again, that's getting expensive. If it gets all the way to production, maybe you have a breach. That could be millions of dollars just giving out lots of credit card monitoring and credit monitoring packages to millions of people. So if you can have that security champion working with the developers saying, here's why you care about this and here's how to do it, you can get a lot of value out of that. So bringing everything together, I talk a lot about purple teams. It's something that I'm a fairly big believer in because I've seen the blue team, red team models working separately, and it typically doesn't work. But if you're not familiar with purple teams, there is no single purple team. It's when you have the red and blue teams incentivized to work together, incentivized, enabled, empowered, all that good stuff. Both sides work with the other, and you get this wonderful feedback loop of getting stuff discovered and fixed quickly, rather than working in opposition. And, you know, people often say, isn't this obvious? Shouldn't we be doing it? Well, yes, but I've seen very obvious things not happen very often, especially in the large corporations. Things are very slow to change, or there's that siloization where they have the completely different management chains I mentioned. So I push to get the two teams working together as much as I can. So a focus on detection, which I think might be a better metric that both the red team and the blue team can work towards. So this is the 11060 framework was created by CrowdStrike. The idea is that you have 1 minute to detect an intrusion. After you detect it, you have 10 minutes to investigate. And after you investigate, you have 60 minutes to react. And they're pushing this because they've got some research they put out fairly recently on the breakout times for APTs, which is a great word to say at security conferences, I know. So according to their research, and they're a little biased because they are an incident response and defense company, if you get hacked by a Russian government group, you're looking at 19 minutes before they go from the initial computer they get into to another computer on your system or the network itself. North Korea, they say, is about 140 minutes. Then the Chinese, I suspect that there are some Chinese groups that are way up there in the Russian range, but I have no actual proof. And 582 minutes sounds like a lot, but many people don't detect breaches for months. So by that point, they've gotten into your network, they've gotten into different systems, and they've probably gotten your crown jewels, the things that actually matter, and gotten them out of your company. So I've done some purple team engagements where it was more or less a big red team engagement that we're saying was a purple team engagement. And when you're just getting started with this, if you have a large gap, you don't get a lot of value out of it because you find a hole and then you go on and then you do this and you do this and you do this. And the blue team still hasn't seen you get in through the initial hole. And that gets really demoralizing for the blue team because it's not really collaborative at that point. And it's just, you know, the analogy I use a lot is you're getting punched in the face. And you know, you're doing your best and there's so many holes. You've been telling management for years that you needed to get this thing done. The red team comes in, does exactly what you said that they could do, and then you get blamed for it. And so one of the big things that's being talked at, probably about 40% of the talks I've seen at conferences this year have at least mentioned the attack matrix. If you're not familiar, this was created by MITRE. It is kind of a add-on or a successor to the cyber kill chain, TM, by Lockheed Martin. And what it does is it takes the concept of the different phases of attacks and breaks it into granular segments. So I will not read all of these, but basically it is top down, left to right, what an attacker does once they start getting into your network. And really what you care about is how they get in and then the impact at the end. And all the things in the middle are important. As with security, this is a great thing to push left on if you assume that left is the upper left, because each one of those is cheaper progressively from impact to detect and stop. So by the point that they're already doing exfiltration, you've lost the game. That's very expensive to recover from. If you can catch them doing defense evasion, that's reasonably cheap. If you can catch the initial access, that's the cheapest you're going to get. And you can find this online. This is actually a large enough screen, you can probably read some of it. So this is an example, but each column actually goes way down to the bottom. This is just what I could fit on the screen. And so it's examples. The execution may be a compiled HTML file that has JavaScript that exploits Internet Explorer, privileged escalation, the AppCert DLLs. It's taking advantage of Windows not having great security. And so it's specific ways that attackers are known to do these things. So each one of these, those are links if you go to the actual attack matrix, and it will say who's known to use them. So the big APT groups that are known to use different things, they give examples of it. There's some hands-on example. They've got, and MITRE themselves has an emulation program that will do various parts of these segments. I'm not going to go too much deeper into it, but if you're fired up and want to learn more, they're actually doing a conference that is online at the end of the month, and it's free to attend on the online streams. So I would definitely recommend checking out at least some of those if you want to learn more about attack. And so what you can do is start building, you take that chart and turn it into a heat map and say, here's what we can detect. Here's what, well, you can start first and say, here's what does and doesn't apply to our environment. So if you're an OS X shop and Linux shop and you have no Windows, you can take all of those things that are Windows specific and eliminate them. It's also a framework that you can add to, so if you find that attackers are actually doing something that is not part of the framework, you can add it for your personal framework, and you can also submit it to them, and if they validate it, they will add it. So you can go through, figure out what your best choke points are, where you've got the best visibility into what people are going to be doing, and start going through and saying, okay, here's what we can detect, here's what we can't detect and should be able to do. And you do a small granular test rather than doing the big red team test where it's getting domain admin and getting the credit card numbers out or what have you. It's just, okay, we found a gap, let's stop and work on it together. Once you can detect it, then do you have a playbook? If you don't have a playbook, in some cases, the attackers can explain hands-on with the blue team, here's how this attack actually works. So a common example of when defenders don't know how an attack works. So SQL injection, a lot of people use the 1 = 1 as a part of the logic within SQL. So a lot of people wrote rules that said, okay, look for 1 = 1. That doesn't actually solve the problem because you can use any sort of logic there. It's having the attacker go to the defense side and say, no, that doesn't actually make sense. Here's what you need to be looking for. That's when you can start getting the effective defenses. After you have the effective defenses set up, do you have the playbook? Does the playbook work? And just go through, pick out the places where you can detect the attackers cheaply and easily, and also look for that exfiltration because that's the big one that you need to worry about also. And, all right, went through some of this already, but a big part of it, like I said, the blue team, you want things to be repeatable because it has to be reliable, especially with a large corporation. How you respond day to day shouldn't vary on who's working that day. I've seen some people advocate for having people in the SOC have different toolkits. So one person might be using completely different tools than the other. If that person goes on vacation, the other person doesn't know how to use that tool. That's a bad situation. You need reliability and repeatability for the defensive side, but the red team can help ensure that these actually work properly. So the two teams can share information back and forth. Both sides know things that the others don't and have experiences that the others don't. They use different tools. And the defensive side's probably heard of Metasploit, but may not know a whole lot about it. The attackers may have heard of Splunk, but they may not know a whole lot about it. By having them work together, you can get better results. One of the things I always say is the bad guys have almost infinite amount of time. They can spend weeks, months, even years in some cases, if it's a really high valuable target. Very often, a penetration test might be scoped for a week, 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks if you're lucky. So everything you can do to cheat, or I've been criticized for calling it cheating, but everything you can do to make it more effective, that's what you can do to take advantage of it. And getting that internal knowledge from the developers, from the sysadmins, from the blue team, that lets you do a much more effective pen test more quickly and get better, more accurate results. So on the web application side of things, as an offensive web person, I know that large applications, you have to do a lot of scanning because it'll have hundreds or thousands of pages and thousands, if not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of variables, and finding which one of those actually has a vulnerability. If you do it manually, you might get lucky right off the bat, but you probably don't have time to do it all. So you have to use an automated scanner. If I share that information with the defensive side, they can start taking steps to prevent this. So as a programmer, I can say, if I detect what's obviously SQL injection, or really any kind of attack, just drop the session. If you as the attacker have to go and log in again every single time it catches you doing something that's an attack, whether it works or not, that's a big pain point. If they really care about you, if there's billions of dollars on the line, they may keep going. But a lot of the time, you just have to be faster than your friend that's running in front of the bear with you. On the same side, like, it's not just on the programming side. As a defender, I can put in WAF rules that do the same thing, that drop the session or cause the session to be terminated. So, but had I not worked on the defensive side, I also wouldn't know to tell the offensive side that these capabilities exist. So in this case, it's things I've done on both sides of the fence. But if you haven't, work with your counterparts and see what can be done to make each other's lives easier and make the attackers' lives more difficult. I advocate for setting up a cyber range. Like I said, the hacking part is the fun part. Everyone loves doing this part. And having an environment set up within the work structure where they're given time and access to systems that they're given permission to hack, especially like taking web developers who don't understand what cross-site scripting is, don't understand what the impacts can be, letting them actually run some attacks can be really eye-opening. And with the SOC staff, give them the context to understand what SQL injection is, because a lot of the time they just know that this tool is saying that there's SQL injection, or even worse, that there's a 1=1 attack. Letting them see that you can actually use SQL injection to get all the credit cards out of the database, or in some cases, if they have command shell enabled, that they can start running commands through the web interface using SQL. That can give them the context of understanding, oh, this is what I need to be really caring about when there's an alert that comes in for this versus a low impact alert that might be popping up at the same time. And giving them the training also gives them a career path. Every time you have someone on the blue team leave because of lack of advancement opportunity, they're taking great domain knowledge about your company, about your systems, about the problems. That's going out the door, and that's very expensive to replace. So if you give them a career path that they can go from that low-level analyst position and start doing some of the more fun, better paying, and glamorous positions, that's a big help in my opinion. And having people actually pair up, do side-by-side engagements, writing alongside, that can be really eye-opening. When someone's saying, okay, I just did this attack, did you see it? And they're saying right there, you can start going back and forth really quickly and finding these holes and starting plugging them. Part of what the red team needs to get out of this is how are the defenders going to react when this is detected? Because there's often ways around the defenses. So when they see the playbook being executed and what's catching them, what's not catching them, they can start thinking of more evil things to do to get around that, and then provide feedback on how to fix the playbook. At the same time, the defenders, the common term in the industry is TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. They see what the bad guys are often doing. One of the big things in the field right now is adversary emulation, where you'll take a group that you think might be attacking you and go look up what they're known to do as part of their attacks and try to emulate that specific adversary as closely as possible to see how your defenses are. So the red team doing that research, deploying tools, showing them exactly how the bad guys are doing things and why, that can be really eye-opening for the blue team, and they can start coming up with how to make defenses for that. So you can strive for similar synergies, try to get the management on board with this. So like I said, I like the MITRE ATT&CK framework that if both the red team and blue team are incentivized based on taking that heat map and turning it green, rather than things that don't actually matter, that don't actually increase security, then you can start delivering some real value for the company. Pushing the application testing left, if you can get the developers involved, get things built into the CI pipelines, the earlier you can catch stuff, the cheaper it is, the more effective you're going to be. You can tell the developers, this is what you need to be logging. Very often, application developers don't think in terms of security context as far as what they log. So they may not be logging the actual IP. So a common situation that pops up with complex web applications is the IP address you get in your logs is the load balancer that's talking to your application server. There's a separate header exported for, or if you're using something like Akamai, Akamai provides a different header that is the actual end user's IP address. But I've been in cases where you're trying to do analysis and try to figure out what's going on, and all you know is that your load balancer is attacking you an awful lot. There's no way to actually trace it back to who was actually making the attack and see what else they were doing. So giving that information to the developers of, here's what we deem to know as the blue team, here's what I'm afraid of getting logged as the red team, that can let them make sure that things actually get logged. As an attacker, I try really hard to only demand remediation of serious issues. A lot of especially the scanning tools, will find on an application sometimes hundreds or large applications, thousands of unimportant vulnerabilities that there's no effective way to turn them into an exploit. It's just a violation of best practices. If you're doing vulnerability management using something like Qualys or Rapid7 or Nessus, you can get many, many things that may not actually have any impact on that system. If you narrow it down to just what actually matters, make them fix the things that matter, but don't hang it over the heads if they can't fix the things that don't. That gets them more on your side and lets them do the things that actually bring in the money. For working with web application developers, if you can deliver bugs into their bug tracking system directly in a usable way, that saves them a lot of time. It lets their management see numbers of bugs caused by security issues, which lets their management create incentives to actually do code securely. But it also works better than, so you email this project manager and say that there's a problem here and send them a report, and you can look in our bug defect tracking system here to see it. And then they have to take that, they cut and paste it, and they may miss something. That's really hard from the developer's perspective. Giving them the full information natively in the workflow that they're used to, that makes their lives easier and better. And in general, with any sort of security test, assuming that there is any finding, if the pen testers, offensive security, whatever it is, don't take it as an opportunity to help educate the blue team, that's a missed opportunity. So getting towards the end, I wanted to divert to another bit of geekery. So I'm going to talk a little bit about tanking. So if you're not familiar with tanking, this is commonly used in the role-playing games, the massive multiplayer online role-playing games like World of Warcraft is a big one, but there's a number of others. And it's also used in some other games, but tanks exist mostly to take a lot of damage. They usually don't get to do the really fun, cool stuff. You know, there's the people who are the wizards and that sort of thing, standing behind them, throwing the spells and doing all that sort of thing. And the tanks are there to take the damage in the front. And, you know, they swing the sword and they get to have something with that. But it's not the cool, glamorous part. And I think that the SOC staff, especially the really junior ones, often exist to do a lot of the grunt work that's not fun. But they're the ones that actually keep the company secure. So I can sit there and do an offensive test, like whether it's an application test or pen test. That doesn't actually make the company more secure until the vulnerabilities get fixed. Day in, day out, if the SOC is doing their job, they're making the company more secure. They're doing the actual defense. So I think as an industry, we can do better to make them feel appreciated. I think that we should be mentoring them better. This is part of why I started speaking, is we had junior SOC people that were coming to me with questions, and it was the same questions again and again. So I started saying, how can I start delivering the information that they need ahead of time so they don't have to come to me and ask? And that I like to explain rather than tell. A lot of the tools that they do, it's throwing information at them and they know it's a severity 5, which is red, and that they have to do this and click here and do that. Giving them the context of understanding what something does, why it's important, what the impact is, what it can lead to, that makes them feel a lot better. They feel included. You get better results with that. Because they're the low people on the totem pole, they often don't get the big training budget. That's another thing that I think we should start trying to fix. And very often management will say, well, if we give them training, they'll leave for a better job. Well, if we don't train them, they're still going to leave for a better job. Why don't we give them training, give them a better job ourselves? And just saying thanks, it's grunt work, it's unpleasant. They often are going through some very, very boring logs, doing the stuff that isn't very fun. And you can feel really unappreciated, especially if you're doing that 12-hour night shift. You're living in a cave, you don't get to see daylight. Just reaching out as a company and making them feel appreciated, I think is a big win. So to wrap up, the takeaways I'd love to have you come away with today is just to start thinking about the different incentives that affect both you and your team and others, and how you can start utilizing that to get better results. Going back to the social engineering aspect, when you take the moment to understand why they're doing something, because there have been times that people have done things that make absolutely no sense to me, and I get upset, I get angry, and I stop and consider why they're doing something. And from their perspective, there was a very good reason. And once I understood that reason and could rephrase what I needed, I could get what they wanted by expressing it in a way that motivated them. So I got much better results with that. If you have the power, if you see a negative incentive, get rid of them, talk with your management. When you're doing something, say, does this actually increase security or not? Because doing the test that has no results, writing a rule in the search engine for the security side, for the defensive side, that doesn't actually find anything, those don't increase security. So think about whether what you're doing has actual business value for your company or not. Break down the silos, share information, get other people outside of security on board with you. Make them understand what the impact of it is so they can understand why they have to stop tailgaters coming in, why they can't plug in USB drives. I work in banking. We have mortgage people that have to get a whole suite of documents from people in order to get the post-processing done. And it's very easy to say, oh, I'll just go out to Google Drive and download this and stick it on my system. Giving them the knowledge of what the impact is and give them the tools and the ability to do it as safely as possible. That's what gives the actual value to the company. And as best you can, take care of the people doing the not fun stuff, make them feel appreciated and push management to treat them as best as possible. Questions, comments, magic missiles? Thank you for your time.